You are listening to Nerd Best Friends, a podcast that covers the nerdy conversations you're already having, or wish you could. It's the nerdiest thing you'll do this week.
Welcome back to Nerd Best Friends. This is Analese, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, your best friend, your podcast host, and the hero of Canton, the man they call Rob. How you doing, Annalise? The Nerd Best Friends podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Subscribe and follow us now.
This is season 2, episode 24, and today we're talking about a very, very good show and movie about a girl who was given these magical powers and is chased by a whole bunch of people. No, wait, that's Dollhouse. She's the chosen one. No, wait, that's Buffy. Oh, no, that's right. We're talking about Firefly, one of Joss Whedon's big cult classics.
You know, it's funny as you mentioned that, how true it is that it is in the perfect way of an ensemble piece. Anyone in this story can be the main character or the point of reference protagonist looking at
I'll
it.
have more to say about that and why I introduced the show that way. But before we get there, how about Rob's recommendations?
This week, I am going to recommend Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap is an application or a game. It's a game. It's an application you download to your smartphone. It's perfect for me. It's perfect for this podcast because it is a board game. It's a little card game. In fact, the rule set is the same as, maybe identical to another game called Smash Up, which is a board game that has a bunch of different genres that you smash up to build a deck of cards. So for instance, they sell these things in half decks. So you get your sci-fi Star Trek-esque deck and then your ninjas and feudal Japan deck, and you shuffle them together and that's your smash up. There's one where there's like robots and dinosaurs, and you take those half decks and you shuffle them together and that's your mashup. But the gameplay on that, once you come up with your deck, is you have these locations out on the table, and each location gives some kind of bonus, combo, or detriment to the different cards that you play, and you and your opponent go back and forth playing cards on these locations. The things happen and one of you wins. Marvel Snap is the same way, except it's just all Marvel characters, but you get your deck of cards, which you build up by, winning games and collecting points and, all your like microtransactions that phone games have, and you get your 3 locations. What I like about it is it's a fun card, like deck building card game that you play, but because it's an app, it remembers all the rules and all of those bonuses and detriments and stuff for you, which is my problem with Smash Up, a game I really like, but we're constantly forgetting, oh, wait, did you add the +2 because I have a something card on that location and the -1 because in my hand the app takes care of all that for you, and it's got a great Marvel Comics skin, which is something I'm into. So Marvel Snap is my recommendation for this week. And also Smash Up if you want the paper version, go buy the game Smash Up.
I am not grateful for you for bringing this to my attention and having me download it when we went to lunch last week, because I told you at the time I didn't have time for another game, and here I am opening up that app every day. But yes.
Yeah, you've been snapping?
But I feel really bad. Like every time I win, I think I'm beating some poor little like 9-year-old who's like sitting in front of their smartphone. Like I feel bad about it. I will say it's an easy game to learn. The app does everything for you. It tells you when to upgrade your cards. So I appreciate that they took those decisions out of my hands. So all I have to do is open it up and play and push a bunch of buttons and figure out where I want to put my card. And I love the graphics, right? When you put down the Punisher and it does the thing and it flies around with the red lights and puts the little skull over where it affects. And like they did a really good job putting that game together.
Oh, good. I'm glad you like it too.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Rob. How about some nerd mail? I think we got a nerd correction for you, Rob, right?
Of course. Well, actually, yes, we did hear from a listener we were talking about our 90s movies, and we were talking about one of my favorites, Young Guns 2, and how much I adored the John Bon Jovi soundtrack to that movie. And I think we misspoke and said that the song Blaze of Glory came from that album, where in fact, Blaze of Glory came from the Slippery When Wet album, and it was Wanted Dead or Alive. That was the big single for the Young Guns 2 album. Come on, we know they're basically the same song. That's an easy mistake to make.
The fact that those two titles, I thought they were the same song.
It's the same song.
Blaze of Glory basically fits in that album anyway. So maybe it was one that got cut from the album because they ran out of room and they just put it on the next album.
100%. If you replace the lyric "Steel Horse I Ride" with "Real Horse I Ride," boom, you're Billy the Kid.
I also got some nerd mail. Actually, you have two things, Rob. First, a friend of mine from college and a listener wrote to me after the 90s movies episode and told me that she could not believe I didn't mention the movie Can't Hardly Wait. So if you've never seen this movie, it's about the last night of high school for a group of kids in the 90s and this big party they're going to because it's night of graduation and they're all going to get together at so-and-so's house. Every person in this ensemble cast has a different thing they want to achieve that night at the party. I want to sleep with a girl for the first time. I want to try to get with the popular girl who just broke up with her boyfriend. And the nerd, I'm going to get revenge on that boyfriend guy because he bullied me since we were in 5th grade. And everyone has their little priorities and it all comes together in this hilarious movie. It stars a lot of people from the 90s. Seth Green is in it. Ethan Embry is in it. He's Empire Records and other 90s movies like that. There's a bunch of younger celebrities who aren't quite known yet. So we have Jennifer Love Hewitt, Lauren Ambrose, Peter Facinelli, Seth Green. There's all these artists, 90s celebrities. You've heard of Seth Green. You know these other guys too. You just don't know their names because you don't know actors' names. Peter Facinelli is he's the doctor dad.
Was he Jacob or Edward?
Neither. He's the dad.
Was a dad? I thought the dad was Tom Cruise.
Oh boy. No, it's Peter Facinelli. Jason Segel. Jason Segel is a very famous comedian now too. And he's a nobody. He's a dude who's eating liquored up watermelon at the party. So there's a lot of actors who were nobodies at the time and they're really young. It's really fun to see. Can't Hardly Wait is the ultimate nerd movie that was written by former nerds. And you know this because at the end of the movie, they have little freeze frames where they say this person went to college and did this and became a senator, like they do at the end of Animal House. In this movie, all of the bully jocks all have horrible endings, like Mike Dexter dropped out of college for drinking too much beer and he now works at a gas station who just got fired because photos of the night of the party surfaced or stuff like that. And then the nerd who's trying to extract a revenge on him is this guy became a .com billionaire and is married to a supermodel and owns his own island. It's the ultimate nerd revenge movie written by former nerds. And so we got I can't believe you didn't bring up that if you're talking about nerd movies from the 90s. Secondly to that, I had talked about Frank Darabont buying the script to Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption from Stephen King for $1. I mixed up my Stephen King stories. There's another short story that Stephen King sold for $1, but he sold it to an aspiring filmmaker who was in college and said, hey, I'd really like to make this movie. And that actually kickstarted a whole thing called Dollar Baby. So if you go to Stephen King's website and you're an aspiring filmmaker, he has a list of short stories and novellas that he'll sell the rights to for $1 if you're an aspiring filmmaker, which is actually really cool of him to do. And then he has ones that these are already in progress, so they're not available, and these are the ones that are available, and links to the stories themselves. It's really great. However, the story for Shawshank Redemption is that Stephen King was paid $5,000 from Frank Darabont to make Shawshank Redemption. He never cashed the check. And after it became this cult success, Stephen King mailed the check back to Frank Darabont with a note written over the check that says, in case you ever need bail money.
That's a great line.
I love it. I got nerd corrected on that story as well by a listener.
For today, I am so excited. We've been thinking and planning about this episode since we did the Buffy episode last season, talking about Firefly. And of course, we have brought in our expert panel of guests. Our first guest I would like to introduce is Sean. By my pretty floral bonnet, I will end you. Lewis, welcome to the show, Sean.
Shiny. It's gorram time you had this.
Love it. And our second guest is Juliana. I aim to misbehave, Massie. Welcome to the show, Juliana.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get into it, we will also go ahead and let you guys talk a little about yourselves. Sean, when it comes to Firefly, I mean, I can speak to the fact that I don't know that I've, since I met you, ever seen you wearing a shirt that is not in some way, at least, a Firefly reference. But I know that your fandom goes deep. Tell us about yourself and Firefly, please.
Yeah, so I got onto the Joss Whedon train with Buffy. Came to it late, but got sucked in completely. I don't know when I knew that Firefly was coming, but I remember trying to watch it live, which for those of you who maybe didn't catch it quite so early, it was doomed from the start. They aired the episodes out of order. They took a perfectly well-constructed pilot and put it as the last episode they ever aired, and took the second episode, Train Job, and tried to place that as its pilot. It was a disaster from Fox executive standpoint. They wanted it dead and purposely tried to kill it. But I remember waiting at, in a time before TiVo and things like that, waiting up. They had aired a new episode 11 p.m. at night or something like that. I mean, they literally were trying to kill the show. I was hooked the moment I saw it. Everything about it, the genre mashup is just perfect. We'll get into it more later, but I like that it's an ensemble piece, but that it's not only is there not really a main character other than the ship herself, but no one's really good. Buffy, you had the white hats and you had the black hats. In Angel, you had Team Angel and everyone else, and they played with it at the end of the series, but or with the last season of Angel. But it's not a comfortable universe to live in, and I really liked it.
For sure. Thank you so much. And Juliana, let's hear a little bit about yourself and your love of Firefly, please.
So I came to Firefly later. I did not watch it when it first came out, and I'm kind of glad about that, because then I actually got the DVDs and got to watch it in the way that Joss wanted it to be. So it was a lot smoother and able to follow the character lines. But I fell in love with it just because of the characters and the character development, and how each character had so much rich depth and a history. Part of my love for it also did become the main character of being Serenity. The fact that every single person on that boat was basically saying that they wanted to go somewhere else. They needed Serenity. They needed a place to be other than where they were. And they inadvertently found a family. And the way that this family comes together, and there's little bits and pieces of every single one of them that if one of those people were missing, it would definitely be a show that was less than. And so the character development, the characters just got me hooked from the beginning. And just the fact that every single one of them knew how important that ship was to them. And so then my nerd self, when it came time to name our own boat, I said, we're going to name it the Serenity. So I've got this little red boat, and it's got red trim, and we're debating back and forth between calling it Firefly and calling it Serenity, but overall it needed to be called Serenity. So that's my nerddom right there.
Yep, it sure does. And it's got Serenity on the back. Does anybody know? This is not a trivia. I don't know the answer. This is a genuine question. Does anybody know the name of that font that Serenity is written in?
No, but I'll tell you, when we were trying to get it, because we wanted that actual font for the painting on the back of our boat, it was not able to be found. And so I think that the burned in Firefly must be its own creation. Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we looked everywhere to find that actual writing to be the stickers on the back of our boat, and it could not be found.
That's why I asked, because I had a feeling if anyone would know, it would have been you, so that you could have gotten it perfect on the back. But I think
we got as close as we could.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my mind, it's the same font when I picture it. So Firefly.
I first want to say I am so excited to have both of you here on the show today to talk about the show. My own quick little story is I knew Firefly existed. My roommates in college who watched Buffy with me week after week, post-college, were like, you need to watch the show. It's so good. And I just never got around to it. And the DVDs came out, never got around to it. So I very recently, as my promise to Rob for rewatching Buffy for our Buffy episode last season, is that I would watch the series and the movie. So I am very new to this world. I'm excited to hear more. I actually had no idea that it was aired out of order. And all of my research and reading, that didn't come up in any articles or anything that I read. But that does make sense now because I streamed it on HBO Max and the order of that episodes did not match IMDb. As I went to see which episodes Joss had written and hadn't written, they were all out of order. So I find that very, very interesting. And also knowing what I know about the industry, interesting at the thought that they purposely tanked it because that's a ton of money they spent just for those 14 episodes to purposely tank it. And yeah, there's a lot going in my brain about that thought. So
yeah, the apocryphal story, any rate. I mean, I don't have any industry connections. This is just from watching behind the scenes featurettes and whatnot. Was that they tapped Joss Whedon from Buffy and Angel fame, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to do a story." He's like, "Oh, I've always wanted to do the story." And they're like, "Hey, great, let's do that story." And then they got the story, and they're like, "This is not what we wanted." But since they, again, the apocryphal side, I would imagine that contracts come into play and all of that other insider business stuff. And eventually they were left with having to make it, but no one said that they had to make it succeed, you know?
That's true. And I will also say, and maybe you all would know more about the storyline behind all of this, but the show wasn't very comfortable to get into. Those first handful of episodes, it reminded me of this project I did during my master's degree. It was a technology class. Not worth going into the story, but we basically went around town and filmed scenes of stuff like a train coming by and like a baby sleeping in a stroller. And then we mismatched the audio behind it, right? So the baby sleeping was like rock music loud, like Metallica. And the train coming by was, I don't know, some science fiction type. And watching the early episodes was very much like that, because you don't expect to hear twangy Western themed music in spaceships. And not saying that it's not good. I get the idea, but behind a space sci-fi Western, but it wasn't matched well. And I can imagine the pilot and the first couple episodes is what those executives are seeing. They probably never bothered, because they had already ordered the 14 season series. They probably never bothered to watch where it went to, because eventually they lean away from that when you get to like the third, fourth, fifth episode. And it's there, but it's not heavily in your face Western music background to this thing. So that mismatch that was uncomfortable went away by like the third episode, and they probably just didn't last that long to get there.
So you mean the spaceship going up over the entire herd of horses didn't just, bring that back to you every time?
I actually texted Rob watching the second episode, and I can't remember what, like, I asked a question like, do you like the show? Do you remember what the text was? I don't understand what you see in the show. It was something like that. And
you asked me if I remember you sending me a text like, do you like the movie? Because you had watched the trailer for the movie and it seemed like such a different dark tone.
It was earlier than that. I can't remember. I was in the second episode and I can't remember what I said to you, but you responded back, like, you asked if I liked it so far. And I said, I'll save it for the podcast. And you said something like, I can understand why I like it.
I said, yeah, I was like, I bet your quote will be, I can see why you like it.
And I wrote back, he read my gorram mind. So, but it got better after, like, that text. That was the last of my, like, what did I get myself into, ended when we got to like the third. And then of course the pinnacle episode, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this list. But I just wanted to throw out there that I'm completely new to this world. So I'm really excited to have our guests here today.
That is fantastic. I'm going to add a bonus recommendation because you brought up the music. I have, since we started this rewatch a couple weeks ago, I have been cruising around in my car listening to, on YouTube Music, I found Epic Western Rock Playlist, which is like 2 hours of Western twangy rock with like all kinds of crazy, really, really deep bass punctuations. Sometimes like the 6-gun cocking is, part of the downbeat. And I have been just loving it because I've been so re-enthused about Firefly. For those of our listeners who are also new, like Analese is, I wrote a little breakdown of the show. Firefly is a space western that takes place in a post-apocalyptic universe in which another galaxy was settled, planets aligned against others, and fought a war. It is influenced by the book The Killer Angels by Michael Shera, about a squad of Southern soldiers in the aftermath of the Civil War. There is a strong Chinese theme that butts up against the Western oeuvre at all points, indicating that the US and China were the dominant world powers, at least when it came to space travel. What do you guys think, of what would you add to that elevator pitch or synopsis of the show?
It's always interesting because, again, I love the Firefly universe, but never really dug much past the surface. The fact that it's post-apocalyptic is almost an afterthought. Like it doesn't really matter where Earth is in the story. It just never comes up. There's various planets. The technology, again, one of the things that, Star Trek has whole Bibles written on how their technology magically works. The Epitonus ship, the Serenity goes as fast as the plot requires it to go, and
Right.
and it doesn't bother to say how does it work, how do you get from planet to planet, how is there faster than light travel? I don't know. But it doesn't matter because they're trying to tell a very specific story, and they never let technobabble get in the way.
Right. They keep it simple in that way. And you're right. It being a post-war story is very important to many of the plots. But being, Earth Prime or Earth One and what happened there is really the only time you ever have to know about it is in the voiceover introductions of each episode to try to help out, the audience.
That voiceover, the Earth That Was voiceover was added post-series. That was not on air.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I assumed that was, well, nobody's watching the show and we got to catch them up real quick every episode.
No, that was actually added in because of the fact that Fox chose to put them out of order. So they kind of had to give a little bit of, if you didn't watch Serenity 1 and 2, if you didn't watch that as the pilot first, you had no idea what was going on. So the little voiceover was kind of to help out the people as they started things, just like straight out of the train job being the first one. They had to kind of give you a little bit of background and say, this is where we are. I actually went looking around and I found a quote from Whedon himself that just kind of summed up what it was. And basically he said, nothing will change in the future. Technology will advance, but we'll still have the same political, moral, and ethical problems as we do today. And I think that was just a really important focus, being that, yes, we have this whole entire new verse. We have this whole, we're starting over from scratch, which you can see in the very Western kind of Civil War era type life. But humans are humans, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make the same mistakes. We're going to try and create and control, and that's who we are as humans. And so who's to say if we're going to have to start all over, we're going to start all over and do it again. And that's what I see as as kind of the heart of this. And like, no, we're going to do it. Now we have all this great technology and, so we can do so much better. No, we're still stupid humans that do the same stinking thing. And it kind of, you see that as it goes through and you see the different political changes and character ramifications.
And what an excellent shift for science fiction. We talk so often about science fiction is at its best when it is asking questions about our current humanity in a far off future place. But what this is doing and what Joss Whedon is saying is he's not asking a question, he's making a statement about what humanity is in the far, far future where anything could go.
And he has no problem telling you that he's making a statement. He's saying what he wants to say, and that's one of the reasons he got in trouble for it, is he's saying what he wants to say, and a lot of people didn't like to hear it.
Speaking of Joss Whedon, I think we can get right into it. The first category, Analese, as you put together the notes for this podcast, you said just Joss Whedon things. What do you hit me?
Okay, so I wrote this list after I'd only seen a few episodes. So there are some very Joss Whedon things that were at the forefront. The first is the setting. All of this, the setting, everything that you all just said wraps around what my understanding of how Joss Whedon created these universes. But the things he does really well, he also did well for this series. One, he makes you care about characters very quickly. If you think about all of the different things that he's created, Angel, Dollhouse, he did the first Avenger movies, which he didn't create, but he helped. We've talked about before how he helped.
Not the same movie if it's not Joss Whedon. They got Joss
because
Whedon
of that
exactly
ensemble cast.
That point.
Yes.
How can you make an ensemble picture? Yes.
Exactly. So, and of course, this show and Buffy, he makes you care from the onset. And in those DVD extras of Buffy, he talks about very early on, he learned how much people loved Willow after the pilot. And after the pilot, he knew get Willow in trouble early and often. And no, nothing can happen with like he makes you care about these characters with very little effort. It's done very well in the show to the extent that we have a question later about favorite character. I don't have one, but we'll talk about that later. Like you at certain times, I also see what he was doing there with the hopes that the show would go on longer, that you had all of these little strands of storylines to further explore and never got the chance to. But you care about them very early. Another Joss Whedon thing. Very, very smart thinking about apocalyptic future. Of course, Mandarin would be the language that exists because it is the language most spoken globally. That was a brilliant way. And we talk about like the ship will go as fast as it needs to. We don't get into the ins and outs and the way he works around that as they say it in Chinese. They say it in Mandarin. So when it gets really technical, we don't need to know other than they have an answer for it. They know what they're doing. So that was a really, really smart, just global idea that, of course, we're building all of these different Earths. Mandarin is going to be the language that survives.
And it's also just perfect to curse and get it right past the censors. Some of the things that they said in Mandarin were just absolutely filthy things.
Yes.
That you could never, ever, ever come close to saying in a Roman language.
It was a great workaround because I again in my research for this, I looked all of that up, and I actually wrote I actually Googled why Chinese in Firefly and Serenity and got a lot of really great articles that and one of them says this is what they're actually saying. And I went, oh.
Yeah. And shout out for I guess one of the filthiest things said in Mandarin was said by the shepherd too, which was
beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I watch a lot of my media with closed captioning on because one, it helps me learn the names of the characters because they always put the character name in front of who's speaking, which always helps me, but also because I always like to analyze dialogue and like how the scripts are written and those kinds of things. But in Firefly, watching it this last time, it just says parentheses speaks Chinese. There's no phonetics, there's no translation, there's no nothing, just speaks Chinese.
The first two times I saw
there will be a few times that they actually say the actual Chinese in, because I watch them with closed captioning too. So there's a few times that they'll put in, but also they actually worked very hard to make sure that the interpreters and the translations were actually done appropriately and correctly. And at times they would write a specific, I really want to say this, and then they would send it to the actual translator. And that translator, I was actually just watching a whole thing on her, but she would say, there's lots of things that I could translate because I know Mandarin, no problem. But I would call my friends back in China and actually find out, well, what is the slang that people would say now? Or how would you say that in actual Mandarin slang? And so it was actually very accurate, except for they even had dialogue coaches and things like that. But so a lot of what she said is, yeah, they got the words all right, but it doesn't sound, it didn't, that was the one thing that all the actors were just like, Chinese is hard, Mandarin's hard. So they would do their best, but quite often, the words were all right, but the flow was the only thing that they felt that they didn't get correct. So.
Well, the flow was definitely very westernized, right? And that also makes it make sense for a world that had to adopt possibly a singular language to communicate between all of these now Earths that exist everywhere, all of these places that exist all over the universe. I studied Mandarin for a little bit and studied education in China for a little bit. And Mandarin is ridiculously hard. And something that was brought to my attention that you never quite think about. Sometimes if you're like flipping the channels in a hotel, you'll come across a show that's in one of the dialects of Mandarin. And it has also other Mandarin subtitles in it because their dialects are so different that they can't understand each other within their own country. So to westernize it and make it this language that can be used in other areas, it's something that Joss Whedon does, and he does it very well. And it makes sense why it would happen. The last thing I kind of had on this just Joss Whedon list is I thought the Speak Chinese subtitle was actually incorrect at first because he also does a really good job of creating languages. Buffy has a particular slang, right? The Avengers has a particular rhythm to it. Dollhouse had a bunch of technical speak. of what they were doing to the characters there. I think three of us has said the word gorram, which, replaces an English curse word. There were some in that very first pilot that I was just laughing at. Something
Shiny.
like,
There's
if
always
shiny was one of them.
Everything's
Oh, it
shiny.
was, if they break down this barrier, we're humped. And like it just rolls out of their mouths, like it's the way everyone speaks at the time. So I thought the Mandarin thing speaks Chinese, like, oh, they must be saying something in this language Joss Whedon created. And then as it goes along, I'm like, oh no, that's definitely Mandarin. They're definitely saying phrases. And that's when why are they speaking Mandarin in Firefly? When I wrote down that category, that is what I mean. Joss Whedon things that just sings all the way through this entire series.
If I can add one thing to your just Joss, there's also actors. There are certain actors that
Right.
Josh really likes, and he makes sure that they are in a lot of things. And so, I mean, obviously we keep talking about Buffy. There's a lot of people that have continued and they get to show up in Joss things as well. And then the final episode that was taped in the message, he realized that he was running out. And so he brought in a couple people and stuck them into the message. And actually they ended up being the only trifectas where they were in Buffy, Angel, and Firefly. But because of the fact that he was running out of time, he's like, okay, you got to be in here. And so he shoved those people in there real fast so that he could basically create trifectas where he hadn't had them before. So that was kind of fun.
And Sean, you had some notes in this section as well.
Yeah. I was thinking, reflecting on your Buffy episode, and you have to, unfortunately, as you've talked about on the show here, divorce the art from the artist. And it's very interesting. I guess there's a lot of talk that Mal's character maybe was a stand-in for Joss Whedon. And you can kind of see that. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but if you had the closest thing to a creator's analog, and I don't know what they refer to that, but when they inject themselves directly into the story, it seems as
Sue,
if,
I believe they call that.
Yeah. Mary Sue. I thought that was when someone had like all of the powers without having to work for it, or I don't know.
Oh, you could be right.
Yeah, I'm not quite as up to date on those terms, but just, Mal's problems with relationships, Mal's generally wonky belief system. I would be very interested, not that you could ever get, them to speak on record like that. It would be an interesting reflection. And it is also, I guess, worth noting that while Firefly didn't run as long as the other seasons, there are now various reports of Joss not being that great behind the scenes towards writers in Firefly and things like that. And so it is just another reminder that, you can like something and still not approve of everything, the whole of a person, that just because someone creates something that a community likes, it doesn't have to mean that creator is infallible.
And what's most
Right.
interesting to me about that is that one of the accusations of Joss's behavior behind the scenes is him being a misogynist and treating women very poorly. And yet in all of these series that he writes, women are the central, most powerful characters. It is a weird dichotomy. And I will say that is actually had one more in my just Joss Whedon things, is as he picked Mandarin as a global thing to bring that into this world, he also chose what we can call the oldest women profession and makes that a high standard, elevated, a concubine. In older worlds, we know we have the history to say that they were regarded as higher beings. Our current society does not see it that way, but this futuristic society, him having Inara on the ship elevates the status of his ship and actually helps get them out of trouble in one of the episodes. It is also very interesting to hear about all this misogyny from Joss Whedon behind the scenes, where he actually also props and elevates women characters, and outwardly has said, the minute I have done my job is when you all stop asking about the elevation of women characters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting thing within the show as well, elevating a concubine as this trained, honored, high-level profession in this world is very interesting.
So I got Joss Whedon things as well. One of the things I wanted to mention is, of course, the heart-wrenching character death whether it be the Irish dude in Angel, that one got me, or Coulson in Avengers, that one got me. And then the equivalent to this one, I'm going to say, is the death of Shepard Book in this one, because the other big death, that's a whole nother story. But I would say that those three are definitely related. It's always the same, and it's always a way to like get Rob to have goosebumps while he's watching the things. And then the other one I will mention is sex bots. It wouldn't be a Joss Whedon thing if there wasn't a sex bot.
Thankfully, the sex bot didn't show up until the movie.
Right.
Yeah. And
All
feet.
right.
He's
there goes your
he's
family
right up
rating
there.
right
He's
there.
right up there with Quentin Tarantino on his feet. You know.
At least
Really?
in this
Oh, yeah.
one, the sex
I don't
bot.
remember seeing a lot of naked feet in Firefly.
Oh yeah, no.
Does it just go
River
over my
hardly
head?
wears shoes.
River
River
yeah.
like never
Yes,
wears
you're
shoes.
right.
Never
Yeah.
and actually they focus on that a lot and
Yeah.
especially over the grading and there's a lot of naked feet.
Oh, see, you're right.
Nora
I
doesn't wear
just-
shoes a lot too.
Oh man, you got me. Yeah, see, I was just thinking like, oh, well, of course, like she's different and everyone wears big boots because it's a dangerous Western. Everything's metal and sharp and she's different, so she doesn't wear shoes. But now that you mention it, maybe it's a little gross. Well, thanks for ruining that.
No problem. Though to be fair, the actress Summer Glau has actually a medical condition with her feet. She said that was one of her favorite things about this was that she didn't have to wear her shoes.
That is surprising because she is obviously such an accomplished dancer. We see
Yes.
her dancing in many of the different shows that she's done, and I think that's what makes her fight scenes just so beautiful. Is you can take a freeze frame of any shot during a fight scene with River in it, and it's the lines are perfect, right? The lines are absolutely artistic.
I'm really glad that they didn't get her into heavy fight scenes until they had a bigger budget for the movie, because I think that would have
Yes.
not been the case if they had her do that snap into those fight scenes with the low budget of the television show. So that's a good thing. I'm just gonna say, at least in this, we did not have to see a sex bot writing another character like we did in Buffy. So at least by this time,
Or
Joss has
Dollhouse.
learned. Or Dollhouse. Joss has learned. Don't show that. We don't need to see that.
All right. So next on our list, very open-ended question. What do you like about the show? Well, there's a lot to like about the show, but there's also a reason why we're on this podcast and we're 30 years later talking about this show, is that there are some real fundamental things about this show that we like. Who goes first?
Can I just mention this was a very sarcastic question because I had watched the first two and wrote this list. What do you like about this show?
Oh my
So,
gosh.
I love the authenticity we're bringing to the question now.
All right. Well, then I will go first. I think the thing that I like most about this show is the dialogue. It is written in such a different way than other sci-fi shows, than other shows that are on television. It's just perfect. Every quote, every line these characters say, you could put up on a poster and it would be inspirational. And then of course it's the characters, like we said in our openers. Everybody mentioned these characters are so lovable, they're so understandable, they're all relatable. And because it was 14 episodes of a show and then a movie, these characters got just enough space to breathe and let us know not only, their first dimension, their second dimension, and just a little bit of a third dimension. And that was all we needed, and that was all we got. It's a perfect ensemble piece. It could have very easily, in the hands of somebody else, it could have been Malcolm Reynolds and his friends, but it isn't. There is not a character that is less than another one in the show.
I would agree with you that the dialogue is just phenomenal. And I started, as I was rewatching them all again to get ready for this, I started writing down quotes, and then you're right. Next thing I'm like, okay, my notebook's full. There's just too many. And I think that's the power of the writing of this show. But just on a fun side of it, it's cowboys in space. Like, how cool is that? I mean, they have cows on the ship at one point in time. Like, there's just so many things that are, and Simon in his fancy shoes steps in a cow pie. Like, there are just so many things that are just absolutely things you wouldn't think of, and here they are on a screen. And so I that was kind of the whole grab for me in the first place, was the cowboys in space. Then I started just really falling in love with the characters. The dialogue was too much fun. I love the fact that they were in space, and I had been, Star Trek and Star Wars and all of that, and they're in space, and there's no huge space battles like pew pew pew, like there's none of that kind of thing. I mean, they've got a revolver, there may be nets, but there's not like tractor beams and all this huge. They didn't have the money for it, so they didn't need to. There wasn't, light speed or any of that stuff. They're just with their little Firefly butt going across space, and it was perfect for that. In that, I really like that. There was the Western, the kind of the post-Civil War feel, and then in each of the villages and places that there would be, there's this clash of cultures, and you get to see what would something be, if you look at a culture nowadays and you sit there and say, what would that culture be in the year, was it 2517? Like what's it going to be when we get that far out? What is that culture going to look like? And there is a lot of that.
There's too many things to list, so I thought I'd take probably maybe a more startling answer to or at least a more controversial. I kind of like that there's no heroes, and that a vast majority of our cast, of our ensemble, is firmly in the anti-hero territory of writing. Mal is not a good person. He's loyal. If you're on the ship, he's certainly not going to murder you in your sleep, as he tells Simon. But he didn't tell Simon, no, of course I wouldn't murder you. He said, well, if I ever have to kill you, you'll be armed facing me. So he's never shirked about the fact that he has to kill people. A cut line of dialogue has Zoe straight up telling Simon that if Mal orders her, she'll shoot him. She, has her ethics, has her morals, but it extends to direct family, direct superior, and past that, she doesn't have a whole lot of time for anyone. Wash, fairly innocuous. You don't ever really get to see what he was doing during the fight. Jane is straight up a thug. Like he makes no qualms that he's in it for the money and will betray anyone, that betrays the Tams. That's the whole setup there. And his one read on that was that he was incensed that what they tried to do to River. Another one was that he was more incensed that he just got double crossed than anything else. And Mal, was upset not because he tried to get rid of Simon and River specifically, but because he betrayed members of their crew. Inara stays mostly, on the good side of things. She clearly is running from something. We never really get to dive too deep into that, but if companions are a critical aspect, or at least a highly sought after, high level operator in that culture, she has chosen to operate on the fringes, or was driven to the fringes. Kaylee, she stays innocent the whole time. No one can hurt Kaylee. And then you get Simon, who used his resources to save his sister, which is heroic, but he used his resources to save his sister. He didn't use his resources to bring down the Alliance. He didn't try and blow the lid off of some major conspiracy. He wasn't. I thought his action sequence in the movie was a little far-fetched, but other than that, he was there. He wanted to save his sister. He didn't think beyond that. He's
an outlaw.
Yeah. He didn't think beyond that, which is not necessarily a bad character trait, but it is not a Luke Skywalker, I must save them all. It's certainly not a, anything in Starfleet. They're focused on themselves, which is not again, like I said, not a bad thing, but very compelling when you make a story line out of that.
And we don't know why the Alliance is quote unquote evil. We just know that they're who has all the money and power. Right. So, it isn't till the very end where we realize that, his rebellion for the Alliance was a positive and noble thing, because they truly are monsters. I was just going to add about the captain, in one sense, Kaylee even is explaining to River, he's like, oh, the captain, he's a monster. Like, she says it straight out, like, he's a monster. And they don't call him Malcolm. They call him Mal. Mal is Latin for bad. And they don't make any bones about it. They hang a lampshade on it, and really specifically in the Serenity movie, they really play with that, especially in Act 1 of that movie and going into Act 2. He's not the protagonist of that movie. Right? They really lean into Simon being, the hero of that movie when it starts. And then, of course, it unravels from there. A very brave take when you have a leading man like Nathan Fillion to just make him that anti-hero, make him a bad guy.
And he even says it himself in one of my favorite episodes, which I guess we'll get to in a second. But in Shindig, when he goes, mercy is the quality of a great man. Stab. I guess I'm an okay man. I'm all right. It's like he knows it himself. It's really neat. I like it because, unlike other sci-fi ensemble pieces, you're given a cast of characters who aren't the heroes. Buffy were heroes, Angels were heroes, Battlestar Galactica heroes, Star Trek, Star Wars heroes. Firefly, not so much.
I'll tell you what I like about Firefly so far, and this initial kind of reaction is the stories that we did not get to see. Again, you can see that they were setting up to tell multiple strands of multiple stories for all of these characters that ended up on this ship, and it's a found family kind of thing. Although we never got to see them, what I like is that potential. Like, my brain can sit and think about what would have happened if. And having that ability means the show itself was built very well, and the storylines themselves had good initial starts that never got to finish, which is unfortunate. I think each one of those characters has something that could have turned into a 2 or 3 episode arc in future seasons. So I really enjoy that. Again, you get this cast of characters that you really care about right away, and that you want to learn more about what is Inara's backstory. What you start to hint about Book, and I do understand there's a comic that came out with more about him that I'll probably go to that at some point soon to read, because he's my favorite character in the show. So I like these storylines that were never explored.
World building is always key in a good story, right? We've talked about this a lot on the podcast as well. Star Wars is such a great example of this. Star Wars is at its best when it's not answering questions. It's just giving you these visual cues that allow you to think about what this world must be like, what is important to this culture we're visiting, but it never has to show it to you. Then we move on to favorite storyline or favorite episode. Let's go
favorite episode.
Okay, let's start with Juliana, because we haven't heard for a while.
I actually saw that when you said favorite storyline, I kind of almost saw that as your favorite character, because of the fact that each of the storylines are wrapped up into each of these characters. And so a storyline is, how do these people react to all the things that they say? Another quote I found is 9 people looking into the blackness of space, and then you find out who they are. If it's going to go into favorite storyline, my favorite storyline kind of goes along with who your favorite character is. I kind of broke down each of the characters, and like Zoe is career military. She never changes. She is, can I say, badassery? Like, it's just the entire time, she just has this, she follows Mal no matter what, and whether she believes it or she doesn't believe it, she is career military. She is going to follow that. But then there's that tender side of her when you see her with Wash, and just that, how that relationship has come to be. Kaylee's the heart. She is the beating heart of the show. She just has it and makes sure that everybody feels it. It's all character driven storylines, and so it's really tough to pick which storyline, which character are my favorite. Those two are pretty much my 2 main favorite characters. I mean, Jane's just this tough thug, and he's got that thuggery. He's just that, and no matter what situation he's in, he's going to be the same, except for a couple parts in Jamestown, but that's going to be when we start talking about favorite episode. But and then Mal's just this tortured soul. He's got a whole set of redemption issues that he's got to work on, and he is constantly coming up to the brink, because he feels that there is something that he's got this one quest, and his quest is to just keep going. He just needs to continue. I'm not looking for a specific goal. My goal is just to keep going, and I'm just going to take care of me and mine is what he is the way that he is set on that. Storyline, like I said, is characters. Those are the characters that I just see the heart of the show in there. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
This one is a no-brainer for me as a fan of the storyteller Joss Whedon. The highest rated episode is Out of Gas.
Oh,
It is the episode where the ship has a catastrophic problem, and Mel, being the captain, is the only one to stay behind on the ship. What's brilliant about this episode, and this is another just Joss Whedon thing, is how the story unfolds. And the best parts of Buffy are when he goes into the past and melding that into what's going on in between. And that's this episode. This episode was written by Joss. and I think it was actually directed by him as well. I could go back and check, but it tells a story the way Joss knows how to, where he shines the best. So you're learning about all of these characters and what's going on for them. There are flashbacks to past things, there are flash forwards to what's going on, there's current, and it all wraps into this Mel may actually die. That to me it's the pinnacle episode of the series. This is where it got me. We get to the 5th episode of the series and went, okay, now I get what Joss is doing here. And it took that long, which is, again, we could talk about missteps in this series that made it only 14 episodes long, but we get to that a little bit sooner in the series. We may be talking about a 2 or 3 season series instead of just a half a one. So that's my favorite episode. It's brilliantly written, and where you really get to see the crux and what each character is after, just like Juliana was describing, what each character is kind of after is really foretold the best in this episode.
The other thing I like about that is actually that I have a list of my 2 favorites, and my 2 favorites are Jamestown and Out of Gas. And Out of Gas, what I also like about Out of Gas is because of how Mal treats each one of the characters. He has to go and he has to get them all to do certain things because they're all dying. Like that's where we are. But if you look at how he treats every single one of those people differently, you can see that he knows the heart and soul of each one of those characters. And so, he needs to get Wash moving, so he fights with them. He needs to get, Zoe doing what she needs to do. All he has to do is tell her, and then Kaylee, you want to breathe, don't you? Like, you want to keep doing that. And just kind of comes along and goes into that heart. But it shows exactly what you're saying with Joss knowing how those characters are and how they respond to each other. It's 100% in that episode, and then told in 3 different timelines, which is fantastic too.
Oh, I was going to say, plus you get the beautiful addition to with Wash's mustache, the 10th character of the show.
Can I just tangent the first episode? I'm watching the pilot, and the gentleman that plays Wash, I've only seen him in one other thing in my life.
Alan Tudyk, yeah.
And the first thing I said, there's a dude on my ship that dresses like a pirate.
Yeah.
No, he's phenomenal. And yes, you're right.
Yes.
That mustache is absolutely priceless.
Yes.
I'll go next. I would say my favorite episode. Well, my favorite episode, I guess, is the movie, but that doesn't really answer the question, right? Because we get everything. That's the finale. It's got the biggest impact on the verse and all that kind of stuff. But what I'll do instead is go with Ariel. Ariel is the hospital heist episode. And what I love about this is there's a change and character development for Simon. This heist is Simon's plan, and he orchestrates this. So this is him slipping in from the fugitive, from the I'm making my way on this ship as being the doctor of the ship, which is an important role. But this is where he dips his toe into like part of the crime family, right? And I think it is because of this episode, and we see Simon as being part of the crew in that sense, that we can get to what's cool about the movie. How many times does Mal punch Simon in the face in this episode? Like, if I were going to make the drinking game of Firefly, Mal punches Simon in the face is going to be one of those that you're going to drink multiple times for. But because in episode 10, he finally breaks into that side of the crew, what happens in Act 1 of the movie? Simon gets to punch Mal in the face. And that's where that turning point was. So that's the one I'm going to choose. Plus, I love a heist.
It was a brilliantly orchestrated heist.
And of course, it went wrong.
And you're absolutely right about character development of Simon. That's really the only time. He's the most boring character on the show. There's nothing to him. And then he learns how to manipulate this world, right? If you do this for me, so I can help my sister, here's what you get in return. So he starts to understand his place in the world, this particular world, in that episode. That's a good call.
Ooh, then we go to favorite character. Now, Analese, you already spoiled yours by mentioning earlier, so let's have you go first.
He's the most intriguing, and he's the one we learn about the least, which makes me very excited that there is a comic book series about him. It is not what you expect. He is a character you do not think belongs in this world, much less as a vagabond. As someone who's looking for a place to be, you would think that during the war that exists, during the formation of these new lands, that he would be just like the concubine, someone highly regarded. We don't know why, totally, unless I missed it. We don't know why he's looking for a new place to be. We don't know why he settles where he settles. He's just there when we get to the movie. So there's a lot of holes. And to me, played brilliantly by the actor. And just like Mel, never wavers. And I think he's most powerful in that fight between him and Mel about religion, where he eventually just tells him it's not about the religion, it's about what you believe, and whatever it is you believe, keep believing it. That's so powerful to hear from someone who could very easily been very preachy, religious-y, whatever, but then he also knows how to fight. He knows how to survive. One of my favorite moments is when he's taking his hair out and he scares River. Like, he's just real and human more than any of the other characters. And his only purpose of being is to be. He's not looking for riches. He's not looking for love. He's not looking for anything but a place to exist and live in his beliefs. And to me, it is so intriguing. And I can't wait to read the comic book.
I don't want to color your perceptions at all. Go into it with an open mind. I won't say anything more about that. The only two bits of story in the series movie proper that we get about him is that he was obviously incredibly high placed in the Alliance, because as he shot in the episode after Shindig, I'm spacing on the name right now, but he gets seen
Safe.
Immediately as soon as they.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that?
So as soon as
Safe is the episode after
he gets injured and swipes his thing, and they're
like, oh yeah, right away. He's clearly somewhat in tune with the operative come the movie. He understands the operative greater than any of the other characters. Because of that, or in spite of that, or whatever it is, he's apparently crazily adept at shooting from the hip and only hitting kneecaps. Yeah, I mean, again, I think the comic was interesting. I think all of the Firefly comics are interesting, but they do not. I'll just say this in broad terms. I don't think they hold a candle to the storytelling wise that the show and the movie gave us. And that was my hard thing, is that being so much in love with the show and movie, and that I get the comic and I'm like, but that's just I think there's lots of good things in the comics, but
that's similar to other reviews I've heard of those comics, which is why I haven't bothered to seek them out myself. I think what I have is just right.
Yeah.
But while you're going, Sean, why don't you go next? Favorite character?
Right, yeah. So, of course, Ron Glass's performance, late Ron Glass, he was amazing. He was amazing in everything he did. But yeah, I also loved Shepherd Book. But I think Zoe is probably my go-to character. I, of course, have a lot of kindred spirit with Wash. I think that if I were to be any character, I would be Wash. But Zoe is, to me, the perfect character. She has her mission in life. The badassery, as Juliana said, I mean, she's just top of the notch. Kaylee comes off as a little bit too saccharine for me sometimes. Zoe's just the right amount of strength, and also I love the fact that when she gets in her argument with Wash, and she admits when she's wrong. And she's like one of the only characters on the show that's like, yeah, no, I did that wrong. And then of course Wash keeps going, and she's like, well, you're losing the high ground there, buddy. Like,
yes, I love that.
I liked that. I liked that she's like, yeah, no, I'm wrong. And then wait, no, now you're wronger than I am.
I feel like I'm kind of blending. I blend. The last question, I kind of blend it all together, and I feel like but when it comes down to my favorite character, I would have to say it's a strong woman. I think that's so. Zoe was also at the top of my list, and there are a lot of things that I like about Kaylee. Once, like I said before, and the show wouldn't be the same without that heart. Ron giving Shepherd Book the conscience. It's really it's hard. It's very hard to pick the one character, because without every single one of them, the show wouldn't go together. Even characters like Jane, where you think you completely understand what this person's going to do in all situations, and then at the end, when he's just has this at the end of Janestown, when he has this huge conflict of conscience, like, why would that mutter do that? I don't understand. Why would that mutter do that, Mal? And he has that question, and he's just so confused, like he's learning all about humanity just from this one episode, and it's hard. I can't pick up one. So I think Zoe's probably way at the top of my list, but it's hard to say one, because without any of the other ones, none of them would be who they are.
Was it after Janestown that we also then see Jane receive the beanie from his mom?
Oh, the hats. Yeah, the hats at the very, very end. In fact, the hat actually never made TV in the first place. But yeah,
that wouldn't have been acceptable without Janestown and seeing that humanity in him. So yeah, that's a good call.
Yeah.
Well, the hat came from his mom, and so that's another beautiful thing, is that we learn that was the message where we learned that
came from somewhere.
Yeah, he came from somewhere. He sends his sick brother, money, and he misses his mom. And it's like, all right, cool.
He even gets a little teared up when he's
Yeah, he
watching it.
does.
Like when he's reading the letter, he gets a little teared up. He doesn't read too well, but he also gets a little teared up. So
Exactly.
yeah, it was fabulous.
Yeah, that's one of those characters. He was Adam Baldwin. He never showed up in Buffy though. He was obviously had a big role in Angel, but he was never in Buffy. Yeah.
Right. There, like I said, there was only two that were in the full trifecta. And yeah, he was only a double.
So as I often do with these questions, I like to choose a weird answer. So I almost went with Serenity as my favorite character because there is so much personality there. And especially when we get to, there's all the things that we love about her and how the crew takes care of her and how we have an emotional response when something bad happens to her. And, she was another one of those poignant emotional deaths that happened in the movie. Speaking of the movie, one of the greatest things that exists is that almost 5-minute one take shot of introducing all of the characters in the stance of walking through every room in Serenity is just one of the greatest things I've ever been able to witness in my life. I love it so much, but I'm going to cheat even further than that and say that my favorite character of the show is Wash and Zoe's marriage. And I'm going to classify that in a character because as I was thinking about this, like, God, we all love the characters. I wonder if it would be more fun to think about like, well, which Firefly character are you? Like you take the online quiz and answer the questions and it says, oh, you're a Shepherd Book or whatever it might be. But every time I watch this show, it's my favorite thing. My favorite part of those characters is that marriage. We see in the Out of Gas episode, and we do the flashback when Zoe meets Wash, she's not impressed with him at all. I don't like him. This mirrors what my wife thought of me when she first met me completely, right? It took me a lot of time to wear her down and convince her that I was the one, right? And that's because completely different, and it doesn't hurt that Zoe is also a person of color, but like I am completely outside of that world. I have no reference for the hardships and things that my wife has gone through. It's just such a perfect matchup. And when we get to the one with the guy with the German accent, which kind of doesn't make sense. Miska. And he's torturing Mal and he's torturing Wash. And she comes in and he's like, well, you can only rescue one of them and you're going to need to make sure. Him. And points right at her husband and says him. That I'll never not get a little bit of a tear in my eye because that when that marriage happened, she had to look at herself in the mirror and make that decision of I am loyal to this captain. It is in my blood through and through to be loyal to this cause. But if I'm going to get married to this person, that is going to take priority over everything else. And then, of course, when Wash dies in the movie, it is shocking. It is just absolutely shocking and your heart sinks, but it's later when they're in the hallway and she's just sitting there loading that gun and Mal's like, you got to be here. You got to be with me. And she's like, I will hold the line. And then when stuff starts getting crazy and those Reavers are busting in, she runs right into certain death. And Jane's back in there. Zoe, damn it, get back on the line. And the Zoe we know would have held that line. But Zoe without Wash, she runs into certain death because she doesn't know how to be anymore. And that's when I start bawling. It's not when Wash dies. It's that moment when we really see that the marriage is over. That character's done. That's the one that gets me. And I'm just dying and tears running down my face. So that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose the marriage is my favorite character in Firefly.
The only time Zoe didn't follow an order when she married Wash. Which was another great line. It's
absolutely
earlier in that same episode, the same torture episode. There's name one order she's ever denied you. He's like, well, she married you.
Well, she married you.
Can I say I had total deja vu flashback when Wash was killed to the same exact gut tensing, wrenching when Tara was shot on the second floor of the house in
yes.
Buffy.
Yeah.
It like took me right back to that shot. And another Joss Whedon thing. He knows exactly the timing when to pull that trigger, like literally pull the trigger when you absolutely least expect it. Oh, they just had this big montage, which to me looked like it could have been a ride at Disneyland, but a big montage trying to get this thing to land. And I saw them all like this, and I'm like, hey, they look like they're riding it. They're swaying back and forth. They're like on a ride.
Well, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, okay, it looks like that when you go to Universal Studios and you're sitting in that car kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so you get there and he's reciting the like, I am a leaf on the wind, I am a leaf on the wind. And you get there and they land and the ship's going all over the place and pieces flying, and they get there and you're like, oh, boom.
Yeah.
And that's already sad because that's when Serenity dies. Like that's the death of Serenity. When Serenity crashes and you see the wings popping off and stuff, you're like, oh, they're not getting off this planet. One of my favorite characters was just destroyed. It can't get any worse than this.
Turns out.
And then it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. So yeah, same flashback to that moment. But I that's a good character choice, Rob.
I like that one.
Good character choice.
It always has to be something a little bit mumbo jumbo, right?
Although I may argue that Zoe knows that Mel can survive and get out of that situation as another reason why she chooses the husband first.
I think you can read it both ways. I definitely saw that too.
Probably
and I
both
think that's
ways.
how it's explained. But for me, it's because she made a connection. She made a commitment to Wash that was higher than anything else that she had.
Absolutely.
Well, and Wash goes on to say that the only reason he survived was because of Mal. So Mal leaves and she kills both. So no, it was the right decision both from a heart and head perspective.
Yeah.
That's what made her choice so quick. And she's like, oh, you wanted to finish? All right, go ahead and finish your bad guy villain speech, but I'm taking him.
I almost imagined. I almost imagined because those characters and this idea was so well written. Also imagined that she had that conversation with Mel at the point she's going to marry him. They probably had this exact conversation. If we are ever too in trouble, what are you going to do? She's like, well, I'm going to save my husband, right? Like I can imagine that conversation happening somewhere along that timeline as well. So I love it. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and I'm the same as Sean. Like, what character am I? I'm Wash. Of course I am. Like in my relationship. Do I do a job? I do an important job, sure. But is it something nobody else could do? No. Right.
So we have two things on here about cult following. This Firefly had such a cult following. People were very angry when it was not renewed, when it was canceled. That led to the movie. And if I'm understanding the timeline well, it was a self-funded or kickstarted or...
Well, not kickstarted necessarily, but I don't believe Universal Pictures put a ton of money in this. It was, I think a lot of the money raised was done by Joss Whedon and fans and his production company. But this is a place where our expert panel of guests are going to be able to be able to shine.
Talk to us more about this cult following of the series at the time.
Well, I mean, you don't treat a series the way you do, again, with the sort of dysfunctional way that they aired the show and people diving into it's going to create some rabid fan base. And, rabid fan base is always a bad thing to cross. Rabid fan base is sometimes bad to have anyway, but as far as I know, they really went above and beyond to try and convince the studio that it could carry a movie, so much so that I think one of the things I put in there was that, talking more about the show versus the movie. The movie, if you really watch the movie, and especially if you can try and find someone who can watch the movie without having seen the series, the movie is not a good movie without the series. It doesn't exist in a world without the series.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's not surprising to me that the movie didn't do well because, again, you're the wrong audience if you've never seen the show before and you go into the movie.
Which is a great and brave choice by the people making that movie to say, like, this is for the fans, this is to finish the story. Yeah. It's not to make money, and that is so rare.
And it's not a movie that gets made today. Like, I'm sorry, there's not a streaming service. There's not going to be the same sort of outpouring. So it was really, I'm sure there were other things after Firefly, but it really was the sort of last cultural moment where a fan of a TV show can make something happen. Now it would just be, oh, let's stream it, or we can have a smaller audience and not be a big deal. In many ways it was this generation's version of Star Trek coming back, where you have Trek, of course, was obviously way bigger than than Firefly will ever be. But I mean, they got a movie after that was, I believe, first movie was after the series was gone from television. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. You have a scenario where they convinced someone to throw enough money to make a movie. I really enjoyed it. They did a lot of fundraising with the movie in particular, which is, again, another sort of fascinating aspect. It would go on to have charity screening. And again, it's all interesting in the light of Joss's, behind the camera activities, to see him supporting such an amazing charity on top of it, and then him being him. But yeah, the rabid fan base, I went to a con, I believe it was a Silicon Valley Comic-Con, and watched a fan-made movie, Browncoats Independence War. It was a war movie set in the fire, at the end of the Browncoats Revolution, and it was this gritty, almost sort of like Saving Private Ryan type take on it, and it was interesting. It didn't, in my opinion, it didn't work. It just was, that's not what the Firefly universe was. It was a brilliant fan movie. I mean, from the technical standpoint, I loved it, but it's fascinating to me as a fan, seeing other fans and being like, that's what you decided to watch Firefly. And of course, the parody of the Janestown song to Jane, and people have written it about Joss, and people have rewritten it to be about Serenity and all of these things. There's some very impressive fans out there.
What I thought was interesting from all of that, like just what you're saying, is that the fans took on the whole idea of the browncoats, and they felt that they were refighting this battle. And so the fans became the browncoats. In fact, that was part of their website to, get the movie started again. And then looking at Fox and just the whole idea of a network in the first place as the alliance, those that are going to control what you think and control what you see and control in that. And that was kind of the whole idea. So I thought that was kind of, you brought up the brown coat, and that just reminded me of all of that, oh gosh, that's right. They're going to be fighting for independence. They're fighting the alliance.
Well, and not to mention our current political climate of just sitting there and embracing the rebels and embracing the, for lack of a better term, space confederacy, and it's like, okay, well, now you've drifted into some fairly uncomfortable parallels. They do go out of their way, especially in the backstories, to show that the alliance is more power hungry, is more fascist and whatnot. But it's definitely interesting that they can create such an upswelling of support for the losers of a space civil war.
I also find very interesting that what happens to Firefly is opposite of what happened to Buffy, right? Joss Whedon gets greenlit for 14 episodes of this series he pitches. He creates it. It gets flubbed. It gets canceled. All this support and cult following, the brown coat fans, whatever it may be, funding a movie. It's the opposite story for Buffy, in which he had this story and got greenlit for a movie and then was told to take a back seat to the big studio, and they create this campy, cutesy, not really horror genre movie with popular actors at the time, a Luke Perry and a Christy Swanson and Pee Wee Herman, and it has a little bit of dark, but it's mostly this campy, and Joss hates it. So then he finds a way to get greenlit and tell the story he wanted to tell, and that becomes the Buffy the Vampire series. And this is opposite that. So to me, it makes total sense why the movie was written and produced the way it was, because Joss is just middle finger to everybody. Yeah. This is the story I want to tell. This is what we didn't get to do in the greenlit series, where it was opposite for Buffy. I find it totally fascinating having that mindset in it and framing what Joss Whedon wanted us to see.
I will say, I'll give a third Rob's recommendation for the episode is, if you get a chance to, I just go on YouTube and watch the Movies with Mikey episode on Firefly, where he basically does an essay review of the series and the movie that really speaks to the idea of everyone in this show. All the characters in this show are losers. They have lost the war. They have lost their standing. They have lost, and they bound together to come do this thing, and how it mirrors the real world dysfunction of this show where they lost the order, they lost the season, it just kept losing, and how that fan base feels like they have something to rise against as well, like Sean was talking about. And of course that appeals to everybody, right? Baked into us as United States citizens since the Revolutionary War, right? My side, the good side, is a ragtag bunch of heroes that have to come together against the elites, or the big corporations, or the coastal elites, or the whatever, the people that have all the power, the money, and the influence, right? That's the bad side. And our side, we're just trying to scrap along with what we have, and that's universal, right? And so that's why a show about an allegory, a show about people who lost the Civil War, can be appreciated by everybody, even in whatever political climate you're in.
Right.
Wonderful. How about some final thoughts? Final thoughts on Firefly.
I'm going to take an interesting stance for fans. I think Rob's right here. I think we got exactly the right amount of Firefly. It can exist. It never stays out its welcome. The mysteries are mysteries because so much of our life is going to be mysteries. We're never going to know all of the stories that can be told. So here's a beautifully written, well thought out 14 episodes that, when aired in order, make a great story with a capstone movie, and then you can be all, I've enjoyed that. And we've lost friends along the way, we've lost Wash, we've lost Book, we've come through it all, and we're still flying, and that's enough.
So I'm going to be the only one of the four of us and say I didn't like the movie. And I think that a lot of the reason is exactly what Sean said right there. I'm also one of those people that has a tough time watching a movie after I've read a book. When I read a book, I love the pictures that are in my head. I love the characters, the way that I feel that they sound, the way that I feel that what happens in that book. And then I'll watch a movie and be like, that wasn't what I thought. Mm-hmm. And I think that I cannot let that go when I watch Serenity, the movie. I feel that Serenity, the movie is, oh, wait, let me hurry up and tie a bow on the end of this series. And I didn't need it. They got canceled. Okay. Yeah. Was I ticked? I mean, it was slotted to be 7 seasons of 25 episodes each. And I mean, yeah. So I was excited to see what was going to happen with what is all that history with Book. There's got to be a lot of stuff in there. And what's going to happen, if are Kaylee and Simon going to get together? Like, I mean, I had all of those questions and sat there and it ended. And I thought, okay, in my brain, I'm just going to let it play out. And I have all of my ideas, and the movie was not that. And so it was a tough thing for me to say, this is what Joss wanted. Well, that's not where I went with it. And I liked where I had been, and just being able to have my own fictional ideas of what was going to happen next. And Rob and I were talking, and we got our son into watching Firefly, and he watched the entire thing and absolutely loved it. And he's like, oh, so now do I need to watch Serenity? And both my husband and I were like, no, you don't have to. And he didn't. He never has. And he's an adult now. He can go and watch Serenity if he wants to, but he's kind of the same way. He says, I like where my ideas have taken me in this story. And I don't need somebody to hurry up and finish up the story to put a bow on it, because that's what was left to me. And so it's my job to create all of those stories. And it's my job to figure out how this story really ends or continues or any of those things. And so I feel like the movie took that away from the fans. It's not a great, obviously we've already said, it's not a great standalone movie. So it was only just to put a bow on the series, and I didn't think that the series needed a bow.
Well, if I'm going to be totally clear, Juliana, I am not a fan of the movie. And my final thoughts are, I'm excited that Joss got the chance to tell a story he wanted to tell. If the series had that tone and the focus on River and Simon, I would not have bought in. Mel is darker in the movie until the end, till everything starts wrapping up. And then there's the return of some earlier comments and jokes. And the very last thing we hear him say for the whole series is something falls off the ship. And he goes, what was that? That goes back to the Mel that we got used to in the series. This one is immediately darker. There's nothing redeemable about him at all. I disliked him in the movie. I didn't dislike him. I respected him in the series. And that's a big shift for that character as well. So I'm not bought into River being the central point. I'm not bought into this storyline that they did a science experiment and created the Reavers as the reason why they're going after River. None of that makes any sense to me and is actually not the direction I thought it was going in the series. I do appreciate that the fandom and the cult following created this film. I like that part of it as the nerdy storytelling, movie and television pop culture person I am. I love that part of it. I am not a fan of the movie. As I mentioned to you all before we started recording, is I watched it very recently, as early as this morning that we were recording the episode. I might need to digest it and maybe watch it again to see what did I miss? What is Joss trying to do here? If his sole purpose was to tell the story the way he wanted it, I would not have enjoyed the series as much as I did. I don't buy Simon. Simon is so boring. River is intriguing, but again, science experiments on a young girl. She's got powers. But I did like the fight scenes and the budget they put into her fight scenes because, Rob will attest Black Widow's fight scenes in those Avengers movies are the best part of the movies. Give me more of that in the series, but don't make those two the central point of everything, because that's not Serenity. That is not what the ship's about. That's not what Mal's about. There was so little connection to me to the actual series, but it did tie up some things. And of course, we have to have tragic death. It's got to be Shakespearean in some way. And we get all of that. But my final thoughts are, it's interesting to see what Joss intended versus what aired via the movie. But all of it enjoyable. Would I watch it again? I might watch Buffy again before I watch Firefly again.
Oh. Are those your final thoughts?
Them's be my final thoughts. What about you, Rob?
All right. Well, I watch those 14 episodes just so I can get to the movie when I do the rewatches. I am in 100% agreement with Sean. We have exactly how much Firefly we need. Firefly was this perfect thing that was lightning in a bottle that made us fall in love with it in just those 14 episodes. And then for me, put it over the top with that movie. There's a lot of bemoaning, or has been for a long time, about, what should have been. I think Juliana mentioned it. I don't want it. In hindsight, I don't want the beer bad or the double meat patty episode of Firefly. I don't want the episode where they fly through a cloud and all of a sudden Wash turns evil and is mean to everybody. I don't want the episode where there's like the red kryptonite episode where everybody acts funny and Malcolm and Zoe kiss. Like, I don't want those episodes. And that's what would have happened if we had gotten more seasons of Firefly on TV in the 90s. That's just the way that it was. So yes, final thoughts are Firefly and Serenity are perfect just the way they are. And I'm so happy that we were able to do this episode about it.
It's that time again. Rob, what's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Well, we can talk about this one together because in this last week, we took a little trip to our local comic book game shop, Metro Entertainment, because it was Bob's retirement party. Bob opened Metro 30 years ago this year, and sure enough, I remember that time. I was 12 years old, or I guess I was 13 years old. My first job I got when I was 13, I worked at the hobby shop that also used to be on Anapamu Street, and I cleaned up, I straightened models, and I dusted models, and I washed display cases, and washed the big window in the front of the store, and cleaned the toilet in the back, and for 4 hours from 8 to noon on Saturdays, and I was doing it for store credit. because that was kind of the things I would do. Like we were into RC cars and plastic models and those kinds of things. And so I would just kind of get this store credit when something would come up that I needed, like, oh, I'm saving up. And, after a few weeks, I'm going to get a new car. I'm going to get new tires for my remote control car and that kind of thing. But then that all changed because Metro Comics opened up across the street, and they had Dungeons and Dragons, and they had comic books, and they had magic cards, and they had all of this other stuff that the hobby shop didn't have. And so I finally got up the courage to talk to Bruce, who was the manager, and be like, how much money is on my on my account there? And he's like, well, we owe you about $120. And I was like, could I cash that out? And sure enough, he went to the register and he gave me that $120 cash. And that was $120 30 years ago. And I grabbed that fistful of cash and I ran across the street and just went hog wild in Metro Entertainment. And from then on, I got paid in cash. I'd get my $20 bill for my 4 hours of work I did on that Saturday morning. I'd walk over to the McDonald's and get a 69-cent cheeseburger and a 50-cent Coke. And I'd go spend the rest of it on D&D books and comic books at Metro Comics. And I've been going there ever since.
To add to that, very similar but slightly different. I actually worked at that McDonald's on Victoria Court there. I would get my paycheck, walk down the street to Santa Barbara Bank and Trust and get it in cash because 15 years old, you didn't want a bank account or couldn't get a bank account. And I'd walk right back to Metro Comics and go in there and find the latest horror genre comic books. So very similar story 30 years ago. And what a fun thing they did. And tangent, by the way, when Rob and I saw that advertisement about the big sale celebrating Bob's retirement, we both went to is Metro Comics closing? Do we need to buy Metro Comics? Do we need to finally open the comic store that we've been talking about for 20 years? That answer is no. But it was fun to open up that world again in our conversations. But hats off to Metro. They will continue to stay open. It's just that Bob's not going to be part of the 9 to 5 anymore. They had a big sale, so we got some cool stuff while they're probably trying to slim down the inventory. Down there,
did some shopping, got some games, got some comic books, got some toys. Good time.
Let me know if you ever need some investors for buying that comic store. I'm not sure we can have 2 comic stores in Santa Barbara. In fact, I'm fairly certain we can't, but
history would show. No.
Well, our comic book store idea actually has merged into other things that we still can't afford, which is why we have the podcast. We just hang out here instead of our game store. But I do think this area could use something like a Mox boarding house where people can go and eat food, have some drinks, and play games. We can talk about that off podcast. Yeah, I bought some games. I keep saying I'm going to stop buying games, but their sale was so great. It was like I got one for free. The percentage was so low, so high. If you spent over $100, it was so much % off. So I basically got a game for free. So had a good time.
All right. Sean, what's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Oh, well, I mean, I had so many things existing, but probably the nerdiest was, I've gone hook, line, and sinker into a D&D adjacent video game called Solasta. Mm-hmm. And, it suffers from the same thing anything does when you take a tabletop game and throw it into a video game format. But one of the things, of course, is building the perfect party and making sure you check all of the quests. And so I'm trying to do all of this by memory. And finally, I was like, nope, never mind. Let me just make a spreadsheet. So went into Google Docs and said, I need these boxes checked. And I've got these 4 characters to check all of these boxes. And then I sat back and looked at it and I'm like, I'm seriously making a spreadsheet for a game. I need to rethink my priorities, but
this sounds like that's amazing. Very familiar activity.
Your priorities are just right. Honestly, I think they're just right.
But shout out to Solasta. If you like the 5e rule set, they do an impressive, very literal translation using the 5e rule set. Very, very nice to get into. Everything's on a grid-based combat system. About the only thing that doesn't translate and they don't even make an attempt to are all of the home ruling. So how you would handle illusions, how you would handle the very RP aspects obviously go right out the window when you do a computer game. But everything else from the combat mechanics, top notch.
This was a game created and funded on Kickstarter.
Yes.
Well, what do you know?
Interesting.
Now you said that dangerous Kickstarter word.
There's a multiplayer aspect of it, so if you want to, if you get into it, let me know.
This is just on Steam right now, right?
Also, I believe on Xbox.
Xbox.
I'm not
seeing
an
a
Xbox
Microsoft
owner.
logo. Okay.
What have I done?
No,
Curse, you're
Juliana,
sudden
what's
and
the nerdiest
inevitable
thing you
betrayal.
did this week? Right? That's where we're going with this.
Rob is going to be
Lost the boys.
thanking you, Sean, in the same manner I thanked Rob for showing me Marvel Snap. That's going to be, I can see the future.
Say we lost the boys.
Juliana, what's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Well, first of all, it's totally a blast to be a guest on a podcast. Like that's something I've never done before. So that's pretty darn nerdy. And actually all the research and spent a ton of time listening to different podcasts and rewatching and watching with commentaries and filling up my notebook. So I would say that's a huge nerdy thing I did this week. But also in my other I've got a few, but in my other nerdiness, I am a mini painter, and I went down to Games Workshop yesterday and just said, you know what? I'm not going to look at any prices. And I just went a little crazy.
Yes.
So I've got
my
boxes, and yeah, I went crazy, and
what a dream.
That's amazing.
It was pretty nice. It was, and I walked out of there thinking, "Yep, I had no regrets." It just walked out and just felt fantastic about what I'm about to do next. And actually talked to the guy for a ton of time, and he showed me some demos of contrast painting, and he had it was really nice because Kyle was his name, and he sat there and just showed me everything that I wanted to see. And other people would come in. He'd like, "Oh, can I go check this guy out really quick?" And I'll be right back. He'd come right back, and we'd continue on. I just sat there and talked to him, and he listened to me, didn't treat me like the noob that I am. Like all of those things. It was really a lot of fun. And I'm excited to start playing with all the fun colors I got and all the fun different textures and stuff like that. So I definitely think between the two of those, it was a pretty nerdy week. So,
oh man, that sounds excellent.
First, want to thank Sean and Juliana for being with us today and talking Firefly with us for some time. Really enjoyable to have you on the show and lend some knowledge in an area that I really feel I wasn't in, and learned so much for you. So thank you so much for that.
And now
thanks
you're
for
a
having
better
us.
person and nerd because you watched Firefly. You're welcome. But also, yes, thank you to our guests. This has been probably my favorite episode ever.
Thanks for having us. And I really appreciated the opportunity and the chance to talk about something that I like a lot. Love a lot.
Yeah, and let me know if you ever do an Angel or Babylon 5 series episodes, and then we'll...
Well, to be very clear, I never watched but 1 or 2 episodes of Angel. So let me drop that bomb.
Are you kidding me? What is happening?
Watch party.
I watched them all.
Here's I don't really have any good reason for it other than when it shifted over, and I was in love with David Boreanaz. Okay. Let me just say, like, I just in love with him. When I got to meet him, tangent, Buffy filmed on USC's campus while I was a student there. So I would find out when they're like, oh, Buffy's here. So I'd go and like hang out, and I ran into David Boreanaz, really cool guy. However, when they shifted over, I remember watching the first couple episodes and I don't remember why. It just didn't intrigue me. You know, Angel has a different tone than the dark lover boy that he was in Buffy, and I just didn't buy into it at the time. I'm like 19 years old, 20 years old at the time. So I never bothered to watch it. So maybe that's a future episode.
Well, you convinced me to watch Buffy, so I started that from start to finish, and then I felt like I just wasn't done, so I had to just keep going. So I watched all the Angels after that. So that's all your fault. And here I am watching all of Angel, and it was, you haven't even watched any of them.
I have seen the crossover episodes. Those were very important to Buffy. So there's at least that. So hey, you never know. Next episode, we're going to nerd out about another cult classic that just had a big anniversary, the movie Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion, also with some special guests.
Remember to subscribe, share, and give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Nerd Best Friends, or send a message by writing to podcast@nerdbestfriends.com.
Listeners, thank you for sticking with us. If you have not watched Firefly, go do yourself a favor. Nathan Fillion is worth the time.
Thanks, everybody. You can't take the sky from me. Ruh-roh.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Are you back?
You're back.
You're back. So are we back?
You guys never left.
We got double Julianas in here.
Wow.
Juliana's now.
Woo! Let me see if I remove one of you.
Oh, there we go.
There it goes. There it goes. Just
All
took a
right, I
minute to
removed
catch up.
one. That was
Yeah,
amazing.
Oh, really?
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back. Now you've shifted
we
because
heard-
you left.
I know. Here.